Hello everyone and welcome. This is Michaela Conley, HP CareerNet and HP Live. Glad you're here today. Thanks for sharing your Friday lunchtime with us. Today we've got Margaret Moore from WellCoaches who's going to talk about her new book. Kelly, are you ready to introduce Margaret?
Yes, I am. So today we're pleased to have Margaret Moore, otherwise known as Coach Meg. She's a 17-year veteran of the biotech industry in the UK, Canada, the US, and France. In 2000, she shifted to prevention and well-being and founded WellCoaches Corporation, which is a strategic partner of the American College of Sports Medicine, and now a standard bearer for professional coaches in healthcare and wellness, having trained more than 6,000 health professionals as health and wellness coaches in 47 countries. Margaret is co-founder and co-director of the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital, an affiliate of Harvard Medical School, and the co-director of the annual Coaching and Leadership and Healthcare Conference offered by Harvard Medical School. She co-leads the National Consortium for Credentialing of Health and Wellness Coaches, a consortium of 73 organizations developing national certification, training, and education standards, and a collaborative coaching research agenda. She's the lead author of the first coaching textbook in healthcare, the Coach's Psychology Manual, and co-author of a Harvard health book titled Organize Your Mind, Organize Your Life, which translating the neuroscience of brain organization into self-coaching tools. And we're very pleased to have her with us today.
Thank you, Kelly. Well said. I appreciate that intro, and I'm delighted to be here. I really regret that I can't see you, and feel all of your energy out there, and I hope that I do get a chance to connect with you live somewhere in our respective travels. This is a fun moment for me, this book, Organize Your Mind, Organize Your Life, because many of us have had several careers, and you sort of always wonder, will they all make sense over the course of a lifetime, how it all turned into one sort of meaningful whole. And this book really did mark a step in that direction, because I started out as a biologist with an MBA and went into biotechnology because I really wanted to help improve human health. And now we have really an emerging biology for psychology. We're not far off being able to explain a lot of what goes on in our brains that we have psychological terms for with biological concepts. We're well underway, and this book is really a step in that direction. Harvard Health Publications is the division of Harvard Medical School that works with its faculty to produce books for the consumer. And I was asked to co-author this book, and with Paul Hammerness, who is a psychiatrist who specializes in ADHD research and treating kids with ADHD. And a lot of the science of this book has emerged out of our understanding of what happens with attention deficit disorder, plus some other things. And the vision for the book from Harvard was to really bring together the science and translate it into self-coaching solutions. And that was my piece. And as I've gotten into the material, I've come to discover that in a sense, what coaches do is help our clients organize their minds. And I evolved the neuroscience rules into what you might call a change process or a self-coaching process that actually maps quite well to what coaches do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that angle today. Today, I really want to focus on helping you think about how you use your brain and how you might use it better so that you're happier and healthier and more creative and even brilliant. So here's our agenda. I just want to spend a moment to, you all know about the obesity epidemic, but there are two other epidemics that do relate to our brain function that are in part linked to obesity. So I want to introduce those. I want to just tell you about this rich time we live in where there's a lot of new brain models out there for self-help. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, there are at least a dozen new books. And then tell you about the 6 rules of order of the Organize Your Mind book, and then encourage you to take a first step towards having a more organized mind yourself. Now, when we think about the epidemic trio. I'm not going to spend any time on the obesity epidemic. You'll probably be relieved that I'm not going to show you the obesity map that we've all seen a million times, where we see this increase in incidence of obesity across all of the United States and, in fact, now globally. I want to focus on the other epidemics. And the first is to say that distractions, you know, there's actually a website, a government website at www.distraction.gov that's focused on the terrible epidemic we have of car crashes caused by distractions. So there are 8,000 car crashes a day as a result of distracted driving. And something like thousands of people die every year, you know, whatever, 500,000 car crashes a year. And so this has become a real crisis. People are reading their texts, writing emails, talking on their phones, and if there's one place that makes it clear we can't do two things at once, it's driving a car and doing something else like writing, typing an email. And so this is a serious problem, and people will risk their lives and others just to answer another text or a phone call. The other epidemic has to do with self-regulation, and that's the notion of the balance we all have to deal with almost every moment, where we choose what we want to do in the moment, like have the cookie, or we choose the future, which is to have the apple or not the cookie, or not or nothing. And this constant balance of doing what we want to do in the moment, sort of the heart's desire, versus the prefrontal cortex planning what is good for my future desire, that is an ongoing tension in our brains. And today we are actually leaning more to the impulsive and distracted side and less towards the regulating and future-oriented side of self-regulation. And Baumeister's book, Willpower, he makes the point that self-regulation is the social pathology of our times. There are a couple of other books out on the same topic, The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal, which is great, and The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. So this notion of managing temptation and managing distraction and regulating ourselves is a real challenge today. And just as an aside, you may know this if you know about the Values and Action Character Strengths at viacharacter.org. I was speaking to Neil Meyerson, who funded the work that built that whole enormous contribution to positive psychology. And it turns out that only about 5% of adults have self-regulation as one of their top strengths, which maps pretty closely to the about 5% of adults that engage in the top health behaviors. So most of us are not good at this. And Neil's perspective is that we probably didn't evolve to be good at self-regulation because we relied on our communities and our tribes to keep us on track. So not only for a lot of reasons is today really challenging for self-regulation, never been harder, we also don't have it as a strength, which means that we're up against some major forces against us when we want to help people be better at this. Just a quick tour of some of the latest books on brain models for self-help. The following are books that I've read that I think are worth picking up. The latest is Richie Davidson's book, who's famous science, who's worked with Buddhist monks and put them in MRI scans and showed how the meditators have different brains than the rest of us, and how those change over time. And he wrote a very interesting book called The Emotional Life of the Brain. I mentioned The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal, which is really about the self-regulating part of the brain. Mindsight by Dan Siegel. He's presenting at our Harvard Coaching Conference this year. He has a notion of interpersonal neurobiology, basically the biology of how two brains work together in relationship. Very cool stuff. Buddha's Brain by Rick Hanson. He's some very interesting work. Jeff Schwartz, You're Not Your Brain, The Mind and the Brain. He's an expert in OCD in particular, but has a really nice way of looking at how the brain often has error messages, and we need to use our minds to distinguish between the error messages and the good stuff. And then Srini Pillai, who's a psychiatrist at McLean Hospital, Your Brain in Business, and then David Rock's book, Your Brain at Work. So there's no shortage of brain books right now. There is a lot of new neuroscience. I think it's worth saying, even with Organize Your Mind, what we've done is we've taken some solid pieces of neuroscience, but we've turned, to make these self-help books work, we've turned them into metaphors using a lot of our own experience as authors. So it's not just, you have to be a little careful to say, that the science has got all the answers, because the biology of the brain is a long way from being fully understood. We're beginning to get some sort of benchmarks and landmarks of what's going on, but there's much more to come than what we've done already. Then at Harvard Health, there are 3 books related to the brain. Jeff Brown's book, The Winner's Brain. Probably my favorite is Shelley Carson's book, Your Creative Brain. If you're a coach, run out and get this book. It maps the creative process into 7 brain sets. Basically, some of your brain parts are on high or low, and they vary according to different stages you're in the creative process. Very cool model. And then Organize Your Mind, Organize Your Life, which I'm going to tell you about. So in putting together Organize Your Mind and Organize Your Life, we worked on what Paul Hammerness calls the rules of order, and there are 6 of them. And I've taken the liberty to put them into 2 categories. The first category is what I would call sweep your brain clean. If you do a great meditation, and I have one that I do every morning, you know what I mean by having their brain clean, as if somebody sort of hosed out the static so that you feel as though you are really able to focus. And so there's some things we need to do to get our brain in a clean place. And then the second is that we want to use that wonderfully clean, focused brain to rise above the weeds or the trees and get to the big picture. What generates disorganization in our lives isn't really just that we don't have the perfect to-do list or project management system or scheduling approach, or calendaring approach, or prioritization approach. That's one level of organization, but the higher level is really to have an organized mind. And when you have an organized mind, it's as though you sit at the horizon, looking out over the horizon with this wise, strategic perspective. You see the big picture, whether it's a small thing like a cooking task or whether it's a relationship with your teenager or a project at work. And what creates a lot of frenzy is we don't feel as though we're in control and we're in a strategic place. We feel as though we're in a tactical place, that we're running around and we're not sure if we're getting anywhere, and we're not sure whether we really have any traction, and we certainly don't feel creative and brilliant. And so the real sign of an organized mind is that you're able to get yourself up to that big picture. You know the steps to get there. You don't stay there very long. You fall back pretty quickly, but that you've got the ability to use your brain. You have your mind manage your brain so that you can get to this big picture. So let's go through the rules of order. And I'm going to start with frenzy in the brain. And so we have this picture of a brain, and the red part is the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex. And the bluish part that's kind of behind the ear and quite low in the brain is the limbic system. And I'm simplifying brain function, hugely. So bear with me. But these are the 2 parts of the brain that are relevant when it comes to thinking about using your attention well. So what happens is that negative emotions get processed by the limbic system down below, and that is an older part of the brain. Reptiles are able to sense danger and send signals to the rest of the animal's biology. And similarly, our limbic systems are very good at transporting negative emotions to the rest of our brain because they can signal we're in danger and we need to act and react. And those negative emotions have the mission of getting us into action and saving our lives. And they actually turn down the thinking brain. The lights get dim. And so when the negative emotions travel up to the prefrontal cortex, the lights go down. And so too much of them means we can't think straight. And so it's very important to appreciate that negative frenzy is very detrimental to our thinking process. Not to say that negative emotions aren't important in our lives. They are. They are our teachers. They have much to give us. But when it comes time to give your attentive focus to a task or a relationship or conversation, then it's very important to be able to set them aside, come back to a mindful, present place, so that, and positive place even, so that our thinking brain works well. And there are a number of kinds of negative frenzy. We all have our own flavors. You know, for some it's stress and frenzy feeling, kind of like your head's being in a swarm of bees, you know, buzzing around. Some just feel worried, you know, even worried sick. Others are anxious, like afraid of bad things happening, and are in almost a panicky place. Some people feel sadness, and some are feeling frustrated or irritable. Also anger. I've not got anger in this list. And so our negative emotions come in all sorts of flavors, and we've each got our own, and they are kind of our own fingerprint of negativity. And as you can see from this picture, they're not good for our thinking brain. They do impair. They have their purpose, and I'm not here today to defend negative emotions. But when it comes to organizing your mind to get up to the strategic perspective, they're actually not our friends. One of the most potent sources of inner negative frenzy, especially in Western cultures, not so much among the Buddhists, but in Western cultures where we're very achievement-oriented, we all have inner critics, you know, the you're not good enough energy. Each of us, you know, you're either comparing yourselves to other people, or you're unhappy with, you know, the way you've performed, or the way you look, or whatever. And this inner critic is, in fact, a fierce source of frenzy. I think it's more sticky and more difficult to shake off than other sources of frenzy. And so just be aware of that when your inner critic arrives on the scene, it's actually not your friend, and when it comes to getting something done. And it's important to kind of shake its hand and ask it to step aside for a later time, because it will truly get in the way. Then we have outside frenzy, and I don't know if your office looks like this. I think I'd be in a terrible panicky state if mine did, but I happen to be very susceptible to external order and hate clutter. Some of us, I know some professors who can live in conditions like this, and they're perfectly creative and strategic and do just fine. So all of us have different ways of responding and reacting to outside frenzy. And if you happen to be very susceptible to it, then it's something that's very important to manage. Again, each of us has our own kind of frenzy, and so it's very important to stop and notice that. So like this TV screen and static, frenzy basically creates a static. You can't find the signal. And that is what, you know, that's the sensation of not being able to focus. You can't kind of swim through the static. And it comes inside, it comes outside. It can be a big crisis in your life that can really take over, or it can be a small thing. I remember, in fact, I was doing a media training in New York in June for this book, and one of the people at the meeting was checking email for what was happening with the Supreme Court decision around Obamacare. And you know, unfortunately, she checked this during the meeting, and it sent her off on a frenzy, and so that brought static, and so she could no longer really focus. It took her a long time to get back into the meeting. And so one of the things that's valuable is to resist the urge to check an email or a text or a phone message before you're about to start a focus period, because you'll end up with static, which is really unhelpful. So what can you do about this? I think the first thing to advise, and obviously there's a lot more tips in the book, but to activate your inner Sherlock Holmes, to just start to notice when are you at your most calm and when is your emotional state most agitated or edgy. And where is the edginess and the agitation coming from? Is it long-standing sources? You know, maybe you do need to change your job or change something big in your life, or maybe it's changing your relationship with your job or your relationships. So there can be some big sources, but there also could be just little annoying things, like every time you pass your teenagers in an amazingly messy room. You can't imagine how someone could live in such a complete chaotic mess, and that might send you off. And so it's really valuable to take some time to journal, to really learn about what causes your frenzy. And what can you do about that once you have some sense of what are the main themes? One of the coolest things, and this is a bit of neuroscience that I think is really interesting, is that researchers have shown that if you have a moment of frenzy, if you just stop and name the emotion. So I feel worried. I do this in the middle of the night when I wake up and can't go back to sleep, and my emotions are running all over the place. And your prefrontal cortex is asleep. That's the part that goes to sleep, and the rest of your brain is wide awake because that's the part that dreams, and it's running the show. And just by saying, I'm worried about that project tomorrow, or I feel stressed right now, or whatever it might be, if you just name the emotion, give it a language, the prefrontal cortex can kind of put its arms around it, metaphorically, and calm it. And so like a child that's crying, the emotion in part is just asking for a bit of attention. And if you name it, you actually enable the prefrontal cortex to both notice it and let it go, and it will actually diminish in its potency. Then some deeper work comes from appraising your emotional state. So perhaps, you go into a fluster every time you see your teenage son's room, and you might be thinking, and I went through this before becoming an empty nester, you might have to sort of think about, gosh, when my husband used to say this all the time, once he's off to college, he won't be here. The messy room will be gone. And what do we want to be remembered for? As nags, or do we want to have a good relationship? And so we chose the relationship, and we didn't nag about the messy room. And that's the strategic big picture. I was overreacting. I mean, it could send me ballistic, especially, and many of you who know exactly what I mean. And I was overreacting. And so I needed to really think through, in this case with my husband, that the fact that I was overreacting, and that I needed to bring my thinking brain back in and realize that I was responding from an emotional, knee-jerk, impulsive way, and that really I could calm that, and I could talk to myself and say to self, this is not a serious matter. Nobody died. And so you might have areas in your life where you're overreacting as well that seem to create a fire flaming even out of control, that may in fact require a little bit of thoughtful appraisal. And this is where I'm actually learning about internal family systems, which is a fascinating form of therapy. And that's, of course, much deeper work around understanding the emotional noise, the parts of you that are creating it, and how to tame that. So this is maybe the place where you start to notice that you've got some old patterns that don't, you're behaving like a 12-year-old instead of, in my case, 54-year-old, and maybe there's some work you need to do to unpack that. And so this understanding these emotional causes is important work, and it may require deeper work than just your own appraisal. And don't forget that positive emotions on the flip side improve our cognitive function. So they improve the function of the prefrontal cortex. And if you remember Barbara Fredrickson's work, the ratio is 3 to 1. When you have 3 positives to every negative, your brain works better. We're more open-minded, flexible, creative. We can focus better. We see the big picture. So it isn't just taming the frenzy. It's also eliciting and pulling on the positive, which might be listening to a piece of music that makes you feel good, looking out the window, connecting with a poem, looking at a family photo. Something that gives your spirits a little lift in the moment can really make a difference in how your brain is able to focus. And I know many of you are in the wellness field, and so it's good to know that, of course, the things that calm our hearts also calm our minds. And so exercise is excellent in terms of taming frenzy. It allows the prefrontal cortex to better manage our emotional states. Meditation does the same, because when we're meditating, we're actually unhooking our mind, which is separate from our emotions and thoughts. We're actually able to create a little space and get objective and be able to just create enough distance from them that we can be more objective about our emotions. Any kind of mindfulness practice that brings you back to yourself and out of your emotional frenzy is a great one. Deep breathing, especially the out-breath, calms the heart rate and improves our parasympathetic activation, and that in itself calm the heart, you calm the brain. And among the most valuable approaches is, of course, sleep, because sleep restores brain's function and it's better able to manage the negative frenzy. So let's move on to the second rule, which is about attention in the brain. And neuroscientists describe this as executive function. The left prefrontal cortex, the self-regulating piece, is often called the CEO of the brain. It's the bossy part. It's the part that gets things done. It's the part that filters out and suppresses our emotions in the moment. So you remember Captain Sully, who landed his plane in the Hudson River under stress that none of us can imagine, with the fact that he had a whole plane full of people depending on him, and the ability to focus in the moments where there's extreme stress is just a really good example of what executive function is. And the attention seems to be, the biology of it is that it's controlled in both the prefrontal cortex and in particular, you know, that third eye that we've learned about in yoga, you know, that's right in the dead center of the forehead. That's where the anterior cingulate cortex is, and the way I view it is it's like an integrator. It takes signals from all of your brain, and then and then all of your resources from your brain, and then imagine a spotlight coming out right from the middle of your brain, and that's where your focus is. And imagine it pulling together all of your brain's resources, your memories, your emotions, your thoughts, your visual senses, all of this together. When it's all brought to one activity is a beautiful thing, and that's really when we're at our best focus. Most of us can only stick with one activity for around an hour, some less. People with ADHD, you know, minutes, seconds, what was that question? So some of us really have a challenge with this and may need to be practicing more. But nevertheless, this is very demanding of the brain to use all of its resources on one activity. And you have to know that it doesn't last for a long time. And so when you're tired, it will be shorter, your attention capacity. But this intense focus is when our brain is working at its best. You know about the concept of flow developed by Csikszentmihalyi, which is considered the optimal psychological experience. So that's when we are fully engaged in a task that we're enjoying, we lose our sense of time. We may not actually be feeling any emotions in particular, but we're just completely absorbed. And that space, that place is where the task has all of our focus. We're aroused, but we're not anxious. We're not quite in control. There's some sense of, you know, I've got to stay engaged in order to keep moving. So it's not boring. It's certainly not a relaxing place. So that's similar, I think, to the notion of full attention. And if you're going to keep yourself just not quite in control and to keep engaged in your focus, you want to stretch just a little bit. Not too much where you become anxious, but your attention needs to have a challenge. You know, so set yourself a challenge when you are about to focus so that you are really interested in doing something that's a little challenging. So how can you sustain this focus? First thing I said in the book is that we begin to think that we can't focus anymore or not very well. I mean, CEOs tell their coaches that the only focus time they get is on airplanes because that's the only time when there's no distractions. So many of us feel is that that it's a rare opportunity to real focus. But in fact, there are a lot of focus moments in our days, and it's often good to just remind ourselves that we do know how to do it. I had a TV anchor do a really nice interview a few months ago, and then afterwards she started to tell me about her personal situation, and she broke into tears because she was so upset about how she wasn't able to be attentive to her children and her mother who was ill. And I worked on reminding her that she'd just done that in the TV interview, that she did know how to do it, and that it was just a question of bringing that same ability to other things. Another great way to improve your focus is to use your limbic system in a different way, because our life force, our passion, our purpose, our sense of our lives matter, our sense that we have a contribution to make to the world, our autonomous motivation, that deep, deep desire to make a difference, that also comes from, metaphorically the heart, but the limbic system in terms of the brain. Our life force comes up from below, and it is part of our biology. And when we can bring that to our focus, that energy is like plugging ourselves into a circuit. It's an amazing way to improve your focus. And just the simplest way to do this is to have a little talk with your brain before you're starting something and say, "Hi, brain. This is the intention for this next activity. We're going to focus for 25 minutes, and this is the purpose, and this is how it's going to make a difference." And just taking a little moment to remind your brain why you're doing this will actually activate the intention, activate your drive and motivation, and make the focus period richer and more productive. So in summary, it's up to us to initiate attention, to bring all of our mind's resources to a single activity, to tell our brain what our goals are so that we harness our motivation. And if we're a little out of practice because we've got 20 computer windows open right now, computers can handle a lot of windows open. Our brains don't do that so well. If you've gotten so used to scattering your attention across a lot of things, you may actually have to go back to building the skills and setting yourself small goals to build focus periods bit by bit and make them longer over time. And just as important as the focus, because the brain does use up a lot of energy in focus, it's important also to take brain breaks. Maybe every hour, maybe more often if you're more tired or stressed out today. You have to, this is probably one of the most important things I've gotten out of this book, because I tend to be hyper-focused and can sit for 4 hours and not get out of my chair. And as a result, I sort of end up driving on empty by the end of that period. And I've had to make myself take brain breaks, and I resent that I'm doing that because my CEO part wants to get things done. And I've actually learned to welcome brain breaks, and I have a list of all the little things like watering plants and making a cup of tea or tidying up something, usually physical. I find that for me what works is getting out of my chair and doing some task that doesn't require a lot of brain power, where I can just let my mind wander. And I keep doing these sort of non-essential things until I feel my brain getting recharged. And I don't come back to my work until that recharge is finished. And that might only take 2 minutes in the morning, and it might take 12 minutes in the afternoon. It takes longer to recharge the longer the day. So just as important as having these focus periods is to know when to take a brain break and to rest so that you then come back and focus again. Okay, so let's move on to the third rule, and this has to do with distractions. And we have a lot of them because the brain has radar that's, if you imagine it, all around the back of the brain that is constantly scanning the environment for signals. Some of us have more sensitive radar than others and are more easily distracted. Today's world brings more distractions than certainly that we had when I was growing up, when there were Sundays where you were bored because there wasn't much to do. Now we've got this always-on world, and our phones are, attached to our hips, and we are always getting stimuli, and so our brains really haven't learned how to handle this overload of distractions. And as a result, it's hard to stay focused because we're so easily distracted, including when we're driving cars. Now, the good news is that what comes installed in the brain, not just the ability to focus and to clear away the frenzy in order to do that, but also its ability to manage distractions. And the brain has pathways for both stop and go. The brain has brakes. The brain can brake in an instant and say, stop, it's focus. Is something serious going on? Did my son fall out of a tree? Has anybody died? Or do I need to move away from my attention at this moment? Or do I bring myself back? And so while we're focusing, we're going to have these little moments with distractions. And it's a good idea to create a set of rules about what you'll allow as a distraction and what you won't. What's important in ADHD is that people with ADHD don't have the brakes working as well as the rest of us. So they aren't able to stay focused. They are easily distracted. Back to Captain Sully landing his plane, that's an example of a brain that could put away all the distractions around him, which were probably of enormous magnitude. And so being able to use the brakes is an important part. And there are choices when the distraction comes. It could be an impulse inside. It could be that you're sick and tired of doing this. You want to go, do something else and play or get out of your desk. Sometimes you may make the decision to stop the focus and go with the distraction, or stop the focus and take a break because your body's telling you it's tired or it's hungry and it needs a break. And sometimes you want to stop the distraction and go with the focus. And what matters here is not what your decision is, but that you actually take a moment to stop and make a conscious decision. I'm reminded of being in San Diego in this nice hotel last September, and I was looking out over the ocean, and I was up at 5:30 in the morning because I was on East Coast time, and I had a few hours before my workshop, and I decided I would sit on the balcony and look out at the ocean for 15 minutes with my cup of coffee. And so there I was, sitting out, looking out of the ocean, enjoying a few precious moments. Next thing you know, I was sitting at my desk, typing an email to a coaching client, and I sat at my desk and said, what happened here? I had responded to the impulse. I'd forgotten something, that I was supposed to do something for a client. This is Saturday morning at 5:30, as if I really needed to send the email then. I was already in the chair before my thinking brain even had time to notice. And thankfully, having been tuned into all of this, I did notice. In the past, I probably wouldn't even have noticed that I'd been hijacked, and I was onto something. And some of you know this. You go down to put a load of laundry in the washing machine, and then you notice that there's a mess over here, and that takes you down that road. And then and you set out to cook a homemade soup, and 3 hours later you haven't started because you've been distracted by one thing after another. And that happens to us all the time. And so what you really need to do is to basically use the brakes and stop and have a moment to tune in to the distraction. And sometimes it's the heart saying, I want a break. Or in the book, there's a conversation between the heart and head about cleaning the garage. And the heart has one view of it, and the head has another. And it's important to listen to both and then make the right decision. And so you want to tune in and take a moment and really figure out what the best decision is to make, instead of just allowing yourself to be hijacked. So I was in Japan a year ago and looking at a Zen garden that kind of looked like this, and it reminds me of how we've got these moments where we can just stop, be aware, take a breath, and then choose. And sometimes we may choose camp sobriety, stay on track, get the task done, and sometimes we may choose camp spontaneity, follow the impulse, and go have fun. And there's no right or wrong here. My guess is that those of you who have brains like mine, which are heavy on the left brain pedal, so we're bossy and we, are wanting to get things done, and we are very well organized, at least we look like it on the outside, we are more likely to choose camp sobriety. Whereas the creative types who are, maybe less good at self-regulating and have more of a stronger right brain presence may be more prone to choose the spontaneous path. And each of us has different needs for thriving. I think if you're creative, you actually need more spontaneity than people like me who can, really buckle down. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because obviously I'm missing out a lot of creativity, and the spontaneous people are missing out on the discipline to get focused and get things done. So there's no right or wrong here. It's really about managing your own brain and figuring out what's optimal for you. So the next rule has to do with our short-term memory. And the brain was designed to hold a variety of things in short-term memory. Just imagine that there are the filing drawers that are closest to hand. And the short-term memory has a purpose. It's what the brain uses for analyzing things, for problem solving, and for creativity. So the person who can mindfully look at the world and walk down the street and notice things other people notice have really a lot more raw material for creativity than those of us who haven't stocked our short-term memory with as much stuff. And so you want to really be able to access these bits and pieces, because they are the raw material that allow you to be creative and get to the big picture. So how can you harness this? I'm an audiophile. I love stereos, and I think about, in the book I talk about, my hands have 10 fingers, and I imagine there being 10 channels. And in a coaching session, when I really want to access my own working memory, as well as the client is giving all theirs, and I'm trying to keep track of it all. And how do I turn on and really plug into it all? And I sort of imagine myself plugging into all these channels. And so that's a metaphor that works for me. So, for some people, you may need to journal. You may need to put bits of Post-it notes around. You may need a board with things. There's lots of ways to kind of put all these pieces together. But what's really interesting? The number one way to improve your access to your memory, to support your problem solving and creativity, is sleep. There's nothing that beats sleep for helping access to working memory. And this reminds me of Jim Collins. You may know his book, Good to Great, and which is a famous bestseller about the qualities of leaders who lead great companies. And in the New York Times a few years ago, there was a piece about Jim Collins, and he had decided that his legacy depended on being creative 50% of his time. And he went to a sleep lab, and he figured out, how much of my time do I need to be, how much sleep do I need to be creative? And he worked out that it was an average of 75 hours over every 10 days in order to be creative. So basically 7.5 hours per night on average. And so that meant that that was how he accessed his working memory, so all of the pieces were working well so that he could remember things. Exercise is a beautiful way, and then repeating things, saying things out loud, Post-it notes. Memory is one area where there's a lot of brain tools out there. I'm not going to tell you about them, but if you want, there's books. Noggins.com has a bunch of resources. So there are ways now that you can train your brain to improve your memory. Simply writing things down, especially by hand and journaling, is a great way to remember things. That's why we do to-do lists. Often to-do lists written by hand on a piece of paper work better than on a computer. One of the more cool ways to do this is to actually have a reasoned debate, a constructive debate with someone who has the opposite view to you. And this is a good time to talk about this, because we've obviously got a big election coming along, and we've got two different views about what's the best path forward. And if you actually make yourself sit and listen to both your perspective and the opposite perspective and truly understand the other perspective and see its value, you will actually improve your access to your working memory. It's as though you're greasing the filing cabinet in your brain, and when you're able to shift to a different perspective completely and really see the other side, your whole cognitive ability improves. It takes an uptick, and you're able to remember more things when you don't get stuck and entrenched in one point of view. As I sit here, I'm gesturing with my hands. I learned this from the book, because if you gesture with your hands, you have better access to your working memory, so that's kind of a cool tip. Two sources of working memory are better than one, so find a partner or a coach. That's why teamwork works, because we've got more working memory to access. So let's move on to the next step, which has to do with cognitive agility. Now, we've talked about the fact that the brain is designed to only focus on one thing at a time, so that's not multitasking. At the same time, when it comes time to shift our focus, the way to do it feels more like taking your feet off the ground if you're trying to throw a ball in a basketball hoop, that you actually lift yourself out of your current focus, jump, and shift the beam of light coming out of the middle of your forehead, that attentional software, and shine that light all on the next task. So that's not multitasking. Multitasking is scattering across all these windows on your computer or all these different things at the same time. Multitasking kills your access to your working memory. It kills your access to your creativity. So it's an illusion that you're actually being productive. What you want to do is to move all of your focus from one thing to the next so that you give the next activity just as much attention as the last. And then, of course, taking brain breaks when you need it. And when you do this, you have to be careful because sometimes you have to leave the last task alone before you really feel that you've mastered it. And then you have this worrying feeling that you're going to drop the ball and something's going to go wrong. And you can let go of that because the brain, and I'll get to this in a minute, the brain has the ability to keep solving problems in default, back of your brain, independently for what you're focusing on. The second thing is you probably have a to-do list of 32 things or more, and that can also overwhelm your focus on the next thing because you shift to, oh my gosh, look how much more I have to do. And now you've created frenzy, you have a choice, you've created overwhelm just by looking at the 32 things, and now your focus is impaired on the next thing. So when you shift all, let go of the past, and forget about the future because then you'll do the next thing well rather than let that be polluted by all the things that you're worried about. So you really want to get light on your cognitive feet. You want to be able to jump from one thing to the next. And this cognitive flexibility is kind of similar to what I was just talking about around seeing different perspectives. One thing that happens when we age is that we get stuck in our ways and we lose cognitive flexibility. And so we need to stay light on our cognitive feet. We need to make our brains work. We need to make them see things differently. We need to have them think out of the box, find creative ideas so that our brains are nimble. And that leads to more creativity because when we can get outside the box, outside our old thinking, then our brains are alive and new things come up and of course then we can see some patterns we haven't seen before, which takes us up to the strategic picture. One of the best ways to generate these new leaps of insight is that when you take a break and when you shift focus, either whether you shift to another task or you take a break, you shift to being physical. That's a great way to shift. The brain continues to work on the other tasks. So you know, that's why when you're in the shower, you have a good idea. You go for a run, you have a good idea. You're cooking a dinner, you have a good idea. And you weren't even thinking about it. You say, where on earth did that come from? I wasn't even focused on this. So the brain doesn't forget that you're trying to solve something and be creative. And it will surprise you by coming up with a really cool idea at the oddest times. And so sometimes more focus isn't the answer. Sometimes you need to get out of your focus, get out of your chair, shift your circumstances to allow, because you see, when you're focusing, you are using a fair amount of your thinking brain, and it is suppressing some of your creativity. And sometimes you have to take the lid off. You have to you have to block the prefrontal cortex to let the left brain, to let the right brain come out. So welcome the opportunity to shift focus. When you're focusing and you're into something, know that if you shift, it's going to help. It's going to help you do a good job with the next thing. It's not going to abandon the last thing. And at the end of the day, you're going to have completed a bunch of really good focus periods. And even though you've still got 32 things left to do, you will feel good about what you did get done. And that's very different from spending a day multitasking, which completely exhausts your brain, doesn't reduce your to-do list, and leaves you feeling even worse about what hasn't gotten done. So when you put all of this together, when you tame your frenzy, when you use your brain's focus software really well, when you apply the brakes and make good decisions about your distractions, and so now you have a clean brain that's really well focused, and now you found a way to really have your working memory at your fingertips, and then you use whatever works for you in creativity around taking breaks or doing something physical or, you know, combining working memories, you know, then all of that will take you to connecting the dots. And the metaphor for this is that the brain is organized not by regions. You know, I've been talking about left brain, right brain, limbic system, but the reality is the brain is one big, enormous network. It's all interconnected. And I imagine that process of being creative and coming up with new, seeing new patterns and being strategic, connecting the dots leads to a new network in your brain. And that's what's really happening when you organize your mind well. And what that means is that you've organized your mind to learn. The brain learns by making new connections. It builds networks. And when you use it well, when you organize your mind well, it's set up to learn well. It's set up to adapt. It's set up to be resilient. It's set up to be able to pick itself up and get back up on track and get back up to that strategic perspective. And so in the end of the day, what we're really talking about is organizing your brain so that you can learn and grow and develop as a human being. So the new ideas and perspectives emerge from the combination of all these pieces. The focus, the memory, the set shifting lead you to be able to see new patterns. And at least for a moment, the clouds clear and you say, that's what matters to me about my relationship with my teenager. That's the right mindset I need when I look at this project at work. This is the approach I need to take to managing my team. I'm out of the weeds and I'm up to the big picture. And just a moment to add, and then I'll take some questions. I haven't intentionally talked about health and wellness today as a standalone topic, but I want to say two things about it. One is that wellness behaviors improve our brain function. I find with executives that they're often more interested in thinking about having their brain work better than their hearts and lungs and limbs. And so connecting the exercise and sleep and the eating and stress management with brain function can be what really motivates people to do something about these things. The second is that I think, coming back to where I started with the epidemics, there's a paper on weight gain that shows that the top 10% of people who are the most impulsive people on average weigh 24 pounds more than the least impulsive people. So, the flip is that the most self-regulated people weigh 24 pounds less than the least self-regulated people. And so if we don't learn how to manage our minds, we end up with impulses and distractions and fatigue. So we don't have the energy to make the healthy meal. We don't have the energy to go for a walk. Often when you help people organize their minds, then you create the energy that they can invest in their health, which then creates the upward spiral, because when they do the wellness behaviors, it improves brain function, which then makes them more energized at the end of the day and have more energy to put back into the bank account one's health and well-being. So the brain and the body the biology is exquisitely connected. When the body is, when our heart rate works well, when we have good nutrition in our circulation, our brain doesn't have any energy stores, so we need to feed it well so that it focuses well. When it's rested, all of those behaviors are just as valuable to what I've said to you today about organizing your mind as the more cognitive and emotional pieces. And what's very cool is that our frenzy is tamed just in life in general, just by knowing you've got the path to go from the trees to the big picture, because you've got confidence that you can wade your way through the frenzy and you can get yourself from chaos back up to order, and you know how to do that. So let me just put out to you, you may find, I told you my biggest area to work on was brain breaks, and allowing, and that in fact has improved my creativity. You may have other things that you want to work on, and I just leave you with these possible first steps. You may want to work on your frenzy. You may want to work on building your focus periods and using all of your brain when you focus on important things. You may want to practice managing impulses and distractions. You might want to do more around, putting together all the pieces of your working memory. You might want to build cognitive agility so that you can really shift your attention beautifully and use that as a way to see different perspectives and be more creative, and all of that. And then connecting the dots, putting all that together as a strategic big picture. My quote to close then is, one's own self is well hidden from one's own self. Of all mines of treasure, one's own is the last to be dug up. And related to today, our own biology, the way your brain works is different than the way my brain works. The more we can understand our own biology and how to manage it, the more we can accomplish in our days, the more creative we are, the more brilliant we are, the more fulfilled we are with our lives. So these steps can truly transform our relationship with our day-to-day lives. Well, thank you so much for listening. We've got some time for questions.
Great. You know, that was so much good information, and you know, it's been 6 months since you gave me your book, and I read it, and it just makes me think that I probably need to reread it because, you know, just the context of what's going on in life and such, you know, brings things out that weren't necessarily so very apparent 6 months ago. So, you know, thanks for that. Yeah, we do have some questions. So, and if you have questions, do please type them in. Kim wants to know, what about this framework and teenagers? Is there research that shows that you know, teen brains are enough like ours, or are they?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Different.
Well, my co-author is Paul Hammerness, who's a child psychiatrist who deals with teenagers and ADHD, and so yes, everything I've given you is universal to all ages and all brains. And today, I think teenagers and college students are more frenzied than any generation before, in part because they're texting 600 times a day and they're just chronically distracted. Mm-hmm. And then the stress of the economy, and then going into your 20s and trying to grow up as an adult is much more stressful than it's been in prior decades because of the difficult economy. And so I think that the greater frenzy and the greater distraction has, I mean, a lot of us say, you know, maybe I've got ADD. The incidence of ADD has not gone up in the population, but our sense is, and so yeah, it does. And you know, something I didn't talk about, but you know, sugar is addictive, and sweet white things are terrible for brain function, and so they can make us crash and impair our focus, and so teenagers are often prone to eat junk food, and so all of this together, yeah, this all works for teenagers. And a lot of parents have bought this book for their teenagers and college students to help them.
Great. Good to know. You reminded me just a second ago, a good friend I was in a meeting with once, and we were talking, and said, I said, well, you know, let's work on this, and, you know, we can get back together in a week or so. And he's like, no, I break for shiny things. We have to do this now.
And, you know, and that's what he needed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he needed to indulge, you know, I wrote a piece on, you know, how to manage the spring and summer. You know, you want to indulge the impulses on the weekends when you can, because then they'll leave you alone when it's time to focus. So you've got to, you know, it's not about not using your impulses. It's just using them in a way that is thoughtful. And I mean, I love my impulses. You know, they get you doing things you wouldn't otherwise do. And so, but they also have to be managed. You don't want to hand them the steering wheel.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's see. Maria wants to know, I guess, can you provide some examples on how people have been able to stop and take a break? I mean, you did talk about getting up out of your desk.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with clients, and this is what I do, is I kind of keep a running list of what are my brain break things to do today. I used to view those as the things on my to-do list that were really annoying and irritating. You know, like I've got to, you know, put this, you know, mail this letter, or, you know, something. You know, I work from home, so I've got a lot of, like, domestic stuff, like, you know, emptying the dishwasher and, you know, stuff like that. And so I basically suggest that people keep a list. Here are my 5 brain break things. And but they also can be as simple as of stretching on the floor, walking up and down some stairs. I mean, the physical ones work really well too. So come up with a list of things that serve as brain breaks for you. Experiment with them and have a bunch of them, so when you feel your brain needs a break, then you know where you're going to go and do it. And then my experience of it is that your brain will tell you when it's ready to go back. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to that, when you go back, it's as if you're fresh again. You hit the reset button. So listen to your brain. You know, we talk about listen to your body. Listen to your brain. What does it need? And when you do brain breaks, don't do anything that's intellectually challenging. You know, don't try to, you know, resolve a fight with your spouse. do something that really doesn't take, that allows your mind to wander, which is why, having a dumbbell and doing a few bicep curls or a couple of yoga poses or, whatever appeals to you, but come up with a good list and then try them out. And I find I have to do a series of a few before I feel recharged again.
Awesome. Well, here's a good question from Linda. Not that this is me, but Linda and I may be sisters. How do you let go of the fear of forgetting something, even when trying to focus and not getting distracted?
Yeah, and so the fear is there. I mean, and we all have it. I think you have to experiment, with trusting that your brain isn't going to let you down, that it will come back later, and the brain will work better if you've given it a break and moved on to something else. I mean, obviously you may need to keep to-do lists and just like write a mental note or do something just if there's something in particular. But I find you have to, it's sort of like riding a bike. You've got to get on the bike, forget about the fear, just like ask it to set aside. Hello, fear, I know you're really worried and I really understand why you're worried because this is really important. But how about we try you setting that aside and see what happens? And I would play with it until you start to notice that, oh, my brain actually didn't forget. In fact, it remembered better because I didn't have the frenzy to impair my memory. So you have to experience it, which means trying it on. And maybe you do it on things that aren't life-threatening so that you're not taking big risks. But you have to experiment and start to realize your brain's your friend. It won't let you down.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to let things, the fear of forgetting things, again, not that it's me, but, to let the, oh my gosh, what would happen if I forgot, make that so big that it's bigger than, bigger than it really is.
It is, because the brain does know how to access working memory, but it can't do it when it's stressed and tired. So what happens is when you live in the fear of forgetting something, you've now put stress on the brain and you've made it more likely to forget. So you actually do the opposite of what you want.
Yeah, makes good sense. Well, last question from Elovia, I think. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. She's wondering if you can get the book on Amazon or is it just available through Harvard?
Oh, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and a lot of bookstores. It's published by Harlequin, which is a full publisher in New York. So yeah, it's everywhere. It's in Kindle as well as softcover.
Super. Okay, here's a quick question from Stacy. And also we'll put a link up to the book on the website so it's all there in one place. She's wondering if it's included in your self-coaching course.
Is the self-coaching course is based on the book and the next book, which is another self-coaching book. So the two, and that obviously that book we're just writing the proposal now, so it's in much earlier days. So it's kind of a blend of the two.
Oh, super.
And there's a lot of new biology, and I wish I could tell you some of the greatest stuff I've learned over the summer. But there's just, because I'm a biologist first. This is an amazing time to be alive, to be able to map biology to psychology, which is kind of where I started. So there's this. What I've told you today, I'm sure in a year or two will have evolved to even more interesting and important concepts. So this is just the beginning. And I do want to say, Michaela, because I know a lot of people are calling in from their workplace, that that in workplaces we have a lot of meetings where people are distracted and not focused. And the person who's presenting is not getting people's full attention. And I think the workplace would change a lot if we all put our devices aside and really focused on each other, really listened. And so this doesn't just matter individually. It really matters in teams, too.
And it matters for our whole society. Thank you very much, Margaret, and I think we will definitely have to have you back when the next book, or before, but certainly when the next book comes out. Lots of really great information, and I'm really glad I was able to pin you down because you are busy.
Well, thank you, Michaela. We go back a long way, and I'm delighted to be here, and I've got lots of topics, so we'll talk about that next.
Super duper. All right. Well, everyone, have a great weekend. Thanks for being here, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, everybody.